sure I'm recording. With that, do we have, let's see, are we ready for the CI/CD and Helm demo?
Sure. This is
All
Lachlan.
right.
I can take the stage if you're ready.
We're ready, I think. So please go ahead and take the stage. It's yours.
Fantastic. Let me know if you can see my screen.
I can.
Okay, fantastic. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This morning, I wanted to take you through a quick demo of CI/CD pipelines using Helm. So what we have here and on my screen right now is we have a Jenkins master-slave setup, and that's running using the Helm charts in the Kubernetes charts repo. So if you haven't been over to take a look at Kubernetes/charts, the repo, and there's an incubator under there, and there's a whole bunch of things. There's etcd, there's console and pet sets, there's Jenkins, there's Spark. Take a look over there. That you might find some stuff useful. If what's there doesn't interest you, feel free to contribute. So this is a stock standard Jenkins installation of Helm. And what I have here is actually a multi-branch pipeline. And multi-branch pipelines allow you to actually put in your repo. And if I go over here and take a look, all I've had to do under the configuration here of this pipeline is just actually give it my repo that I'm working with, which happens to be Croc Hunter. So nothing else in here, everything else is default. So that means the build process is actually contained within the repo. So if we pop over here and take a look at the repo, you should see under my dev branch here, you should see something called a Jenkins file. And the build steps are all contained, build and deployment steps are all contained in this Jenkins file. Now, one thing that we are interested in here, I might step through it all first, but we're actually doing a deployment to a running Kubernetes instance using Helm. So this is kind of a proof of concept of how you would use Helm to actually drive your deployment process. So let me pop back over to what we have here. We take a look at Croc Hunter. So you can see I have a dev and a QA branch, and basically the branches are just indexed off the repo. So if we pop in here and take a look at dev, here's the dev deployment. So I'm going to go and put my developer hat on now and actually show you end-to-end what it would feel like using Jenkins CI and Helm to actually push out an update. So let me pop over to my source here. I have my source code, a handler. It's just a little web app. I'm just going to increment this and pop over and show that I'm doing it. Git status, git add handler, and check this in, bumped version. Okay, and I'm going to push that up. So all I've done is just made a change to the source code. If I pop back over to my build pipeline, I should see it should collect the fact that that's changed and build my artifact and push it out to Kubernetes. So it shouldn't be too far off here. Let's see if we actually... The watch phone never rings, so we should be here in a second. While I'm actually waiting for that one to kick off, we can take a look at the last one. Here's all the build steps. So everything I said is not configured inside Jenkins. It's configured inside that Jenkins file. So that's one of the benefits of using Jenkins pipelines, is that you can actually define everything. So you can actually see here, I'll go down and take a look, that in the end stage here, I'm doing a Helm init and doing a status against my app, and then actually just running an upgrade against my app, rendering in the updated build artifact and any other artifacts that I'm piping into this pipeline when I build. So let's just pop back here. We should see that 1.16 is started. So while that's actually building, we'll pop over quickly and just take a look at my app. So this is my fantastic app called Croc Hunter, right? So it's out there running in the wild right now. The updated build should be out fairly shortly, but I just wanted to prove that I'm actually shooting crocs with lasers, as that is a key differentiator between versions. So I'll pop back and take a look at what the Jenkins build is doing. So you can actually see right now I'm actually doing compiling the artifact with Go. I'm going to stuff that in a container, push that container up to Quay, and then tell using Helm the chart that I've updated the image artifact in Quay to go and pull that in. So you should see actually a rolling pipeline. So this is out pushing it up to Quay right now. Okay. So the container's built. and it's being pushed up there. You see that I'm actually pushing it up as .116 at the moment. I'm using the build number in Jenkins to pin it, but you could presumably use semantic versioning, whatever versioning you're using. If you're using Maven or anything like that, you can pull out the versions, however you'd like to version it. So this is pushing out. Okay, so it's just going to go through and do a Helm upgrade now. If I pop over and take a look, I have this running. It should push out the update. Let's take a look, 10 seconds. So the updated, this deployment's already been updated, and you can see that the artifact's up and running under Kubernetes. And I should just be able to refresh this, and I should be on the next version, and this serves it to me. Okay. So fantastic. Now I'm shooting fish instead of lasers. So the key concepts here is that you can use Helm to actually drive your updates. I'm actually just doing an upgrade on the end and passing in different variables per release, and that's just getting rendered into the chart. The other thing is using Jenkins pipelines. I can define very lightweight pipelines in my source code and use Git to provision them, and to pull request, and using all your Git tools and Git flow to push that out. And you have a full self-contained pipeline that runs on Kubernetes. So the only thing you need to bring to this party is Kubernetes and your source code, and then there was no other magic in that. So that concludes my demo. If there's any questions, you can reach me over at lachlan@deis.com or find me on the internet. Thanks.
Does anybody have any questions about this?
I'm curious how you would want to handle a failed, when are failures noticed, and how do you back up if there's a bad commit? What are the triggers that you're using to build off of, I guess?
So the question was how do we actually roll back, and what are the triggers? So I've taken a good look at this. I was hoping I could use Helm rollback, which is one of the features that'll drop in the next beta. But in terms of detecting when something goes wrong and when to roll back, I don't have a good story around that. So I'm all ears. I could either hook into health checks, I could hook into anything to actually tell me when to issue that rollback command, but I don't actually have that running right now. That would be a manual using Helm to roll back to the previous artifact. So you do Helm rollback version number this of your container artifact. Any other questions?
So if I understand it right, if the build fails, it exits and doesn't even try to push and doesn't do any of try to deploy it. So this would be if there was it failed to build or it failed to push to Quay, that wouldn't be an issue. It would be failed in the update of it?
Yeah.
Like when would you
exactly.
use rollback? It would be it failed to actually do an update. You'd say, okay, so the update failed, my app has crashed. Detect that and then roll back to the previous conversion?
Yeah, either health check fails or like black box monitoring of your system says it's bad.
Okay.
So hopefully the deployments actually watch on the upgrade of the health check, right? They won't actually proceed based on whatever you configure. If we make it all the way through to doing an upgrade and that upgrade on the deployment doesn't work, I'd have to test in depth. But what I've found in the past is I have actually played with this a little bit more in depth, is that you actually need some kind of workflow engine that's greater than Jenkins is at the moment. So you need to be able to have, conditionals. If this happens, then do this, rather than just some kind of sequential procedural top-down script, essentially, that Jenkins files give you. Again, I'm all ears. I have used StackStorm in the past, actually, to call out to StackStorm in the build step and actually say, you handle it. And then it's kind of choose your own adventure on conditionals in that piece. But if there are better ways to do this, I'm all ears. Any other questions?
There's a question in chat here, and it says, is it using the Kubernetes Jenkins plugin to build this on a slave pod or Jenkins calling the Docker directly?
So it's using the former. So it's actually using the Kubernetes plugin. So if we go in and go to manage Kubernetes and just drill down to this real quick, if you configure system in here. And this is just using the vanilla stuff that Vic dropped. Vic Iglesias actually dropped this. We worked on it together. But if you take a look at this, right, you're actually just running a Kubernetes pod. So when you're saying, you know, the only piece that I've changed here is I've created a slave with the tools in it that I need. So I have a Golang slave, but presumably you could have a JDK slave, a Maven, a Gradle, whatever build tool of choice or whatever source code that you're using that you can create. Now you can see here that I'm actually mounting the Docker socket to do the build inside. So it's Docker on Docker, not Docker in Docker. So I'm calling out to the socket underneath on the host to actually run the build steps rather than running Docker inside Docker. Anything else? Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, and thanks for having me as a demo.
Thank you. Thank you for the quick, nice demo. I like seeing this. So about a month and a half ago, I gave a presentation, and I said people could do this, and now I'm glad that people are doing it, and I can actually see it, because I knew it was theoretical, but it's nice to actually see it in action. So the next thing up on the schedule we have for today is Matt Butcher. Are you online?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you give us an update on Helm?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I can't help commenting on Lachlan's presentation. That was really exciting, and one of the things that is exciting is that Lachlan showed there a cool way to integrate a chart into the way you build the code, which is distinct from the way the Helm project has been pushing charts out to a separate chart repository, Git repo, and it's a really cool alternate workflow. You know, several people have brought that up in the Helm Slack, so that was pretty exciting to see in action. Okay, so the project has been going pretty well. We are still on track to hit our Alpha 5, which is the last Alpha release we're doing. The big features coming down, Helm rollback is the big one you guys already heard about. And this complements update with the ability to roll back to a previous known state. Then the next big one that's coming down is we've added in some more strict version negotiation stuff so that API version mismatches won't occur as they did between Helm 4 and Helm 3. So we're pretty excited about that because that's something that's kind of nice to solve before you go into beta and stable. And then the last one is on Friday. We merged in a big change that adds a series of Helm dependency commands that are basically designed to ease dependency management for chart developers. So those are some of the big things that have landed or are about to land. The rollback one is still, there's a PR open, but it's still, we're working on a few kinks in it. And then those will be the big headline features for the next release. So the big call out here is that Alpha 5 marks our last feature release before we go into stability. So one of the things that the project as a whole is trying to actively do is wrangle in any of those high priority last minute features to see if there are any that we really need to get in there in order to make Helm a successful product for you. So if you have a few minutes and want to give some feedback, cruise through the, how many times have you ever heard somebody say, hey, if you want to add a feature request, do it today? But that's effectively what I'm going to say is, you know, we're getting down to the wire. We do have a little bit of flexibility with the schedule, and we'd like to sort of make sure that what we're releasing in the 2.0 release is something that is highly usable. So if you have some opinions on things that you really feel are necessary to make Helm 2.0 a usable product for you, now is a great time to weigh in. Again, the idea is that by the end of the first week of October, we will be done with feature development. Alpha 5 will be done, and we will be hard at work on stability improvements. And our objective from there on out is to cut beta releases or release candidates as fast as possible to fix bugs incrementally and get us to a full-on stable 2.0 release. That's all I got.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so that's Helm. So homework, everyone, go take a look at Helm and see if Matt needs any more features to do. So we can get this, so they can get this out the door as soon as possible. I look forward to using this in production. All right, next up, we wanted to talk about the priorities. We have been working on the proposed work for Kubernetes 1.5, and there were a bunch of different areas that we've broken down. From stateful applications, pet sets, Helm, all these different things. But one of the things that we haven't done is focused on who is going to do what and how are we going to prioritize it. And then once we move from priorities and people working on it, how do we want to handle that interaction here as a group of people? So do we want to do this kind of stand-up-ish? Do we want to do something more, where we hold each other accountable? How did we want that interaction to work, or how do we first want to go at that? So the first thing I guess would be looking at the priorities for these. I can drive, or is there somebody else who's more interested in driving this?
I was going to recommend, from a prioritization perspective, like folks who are going to contribute effort, if they haven't had a chance to set their relative priorities or just identify a few of their relative priorities, that would be very useful. Right now, only like Google and Red Hat have done that. I don't know if there's anybody else, whether they're an entity or an individual set of contributor that wants to rate that, because I do think if it's just Red Hat and Google, it's not very it's not a very great experience for everybody to sit here and listen to where we set the priorities. Although I think we could talk about why we're going to prioritize those highest. But it would be good to get that additional outside feedback from people committing resources.
And if we don't have any community feedback, that might reflect that the people who are generating the work items haven't done a good enough job of phrasing that work item in terms that people in the community can quickly digest.
Yeah, that could be. Here, let me go ahead and share. I think this is the document in chat, and I can, let's see. I'm looking to share it. All right. Let me know when y'all can see my window.
I can see it.
All right. So, and you just see the app. You don't see a couple of huge 30 inches, right? Just the one app window.
Just the one app window, yes.
Fantastic. So yeah, and one of the things that I'm wondering is this really Google, Red Hat, and Deya's driving the work that we're going to be doing here in 1.5, or are there others who have specific work items they're going to jump on? And maybe just a couple of different groups are driving many of the features we're going after right now.
I was actually going to recommend that you share the other one, the prioritization deck, because that actually summarized some of the items here. I mean, I guess if we want to talk about those items again.
Which one's the prioritization?
Is the second link I posted in there. This is the one that Michelle pulled together last week and people started adding.
All right, hold on. Yeah. All right, that should be shared now?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there were definitely some people putting their names down in this who were not Googlers or Red Hatters. I know the Morantis folks went through and added, other the Morantis folks didn't add relative prioritizations. Although based on who was contributing, I could guess. And then I didn't know if there was anybody from the community who had actually signed up for any of these or put themselves down on the list, who wasn't one of the community. If you don't want to speak up, that's fine. But it looks like we have a number of people on the broader stuff. Like it actually was a fairly, I didn't see, there's only a couple of things that didn't have people assigned to it. There were some of the things that that were requests from Brian or general community stuff. All controllers kill examples directly in the apply umbrella issues. I know the apply umbrella issues is really relevant to everybody, so maybe that's an easy one to request. We dig and try to find someone who can, or find some resources across a couple people, because I think that's the thing that everybody depends on today to work. Whether it's, I guess, is apply used in the tiller side workflow yet? server-side workflow?
The applied logic is.
Apply logic, but not the command line.
We don't drop to shell for kubectl, but we do
Okay.
need kubectl libraries. So, you know.
Okay, so it's the library identification. Yeah, and I think apply is one of those underpinning tools that like anybody using declarative config for kube is really dependent on. So maybe the ask here would be that that unless people think that we're not going to need to fix these issues, we might want to go scrounge around the various folks who are committed and look for ways of breaking down these items in deeper detail. This might be like the first call to action to the community that we can ask would be anybody who is dependent on apply to help prioritize and triage those issues, and maybe we can just get individuals who we can work to burn through the issues in more detail.
Are the issues, how difficult are these issues? Are they already outlined, and are they difficult?
Brian had pulled together a good write-up. Let me actually go find that and link that in.
Yeah, some of them are easier than others. Some of them are very mechanical. Like apply depends on being able to distinguish between unset and default values. And some of our fields, the way they're specified in the API spec, don't facilitate that adequately. For example, omit empty on any plain old data value like int or bool has a problem that if you specify the language default value, the field will get dropped in encoding using the standard JSON encoder. And that causes havoc with apply. But there are also some, a bunch of similar issues like that. You really want apply to be able to correctly determine whether any changes have been made the resource since it was last configured. So there are just a bunch of bugs around that and inadequate testing around that. So those kinds of things are fairly mechanical. Some other things are bigger features. For example, there's been a proposal in flight for a while to enable deleting resources that have been removed from the declarative specification. That is the purge or prune proposal that, since we're also using apply for managing add-ons, I would like to see that get wrapped up, and I'm sure a number of other people using apply, such as with Helm, or just in general for managing declarative configuration, whether it's add-ons or your own applications, would like to see that finished, both the proposal and the actual implementation. There's a long tail of other issues, and some of them require investigation. Some of them require a lot of work. Like right now, you have to link in API server code in order to use apply. I would really like to drive it off the Swagger spec. So that's a much bigger undertaking, and some extensions to Swagger are required in order to express things like the strategic merge, list merge keys, and one of cases in the API. One of in general either needs to have explicit support, or we at least need to fix the bugs that prevent manual workarounds from working. So, if people are interested in getting involved, I can help flesh out the concrete details more. Just haven't done it since we haven't had anybody on deck to actually chip away at it.
Yeah, I would say I know the defaulting stuff has been discussed in SIG-Apps, so there's at least some chance of that being addressed. But for the smaller bugs, this would be a good opportunity, and maybe I'll go back on the Red Hat side and try to pony up someone to address some of these. And I think it would be good if we can try and get these burned. Like I would agree with Brian that if we can't get this stuff working, then a lot of the templates and other things on top, even Helm, could be affected in subtle ways that end users fix bugs. And we need to be approaching this much more as a core component that we all depend on, rather than kind of letting it languish.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if there were simple ones that, because we want to make it easy for new contributors to start contributing. And so if there's somebody who's sitting there saying, I'm not really sure I'm ready to start contributing, if we can make that onboarding process with simple ones easy, then they can start steamrolling into more complex things. And so I was considering it from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are definitely simple, but it might be almost as much work to go exactly specify what needs to get done than to just do it. So
one thing I noticed in Brian's list was that things like names in arrays and using pointers for omit empty items, those are things that we've had documented as API requirements since the beginning of time. And the things that need to be fixed are things that slip through. So I definitely see us being at a point where we have limited bandwidth for API reviews, and that's going to be in conflict with our desire for adding new features to controllers.
I think that particular thing could be addressed if someone could just write a verification check to prevent more things from slipping through the cracks. I think that could help some of the more straightforward cases.
Yeah, we've never really addressed fuzzing apply, but we probably should have early on.
Fuzzing apply is tricky. I haven't thought of a good way to do that yet, but that would be definitely, if someone could figure that out, that would be a great addition to the testing of that.
Okay, so then on the all controllers one and kill examples, we still don't have anybody really signed up for any of those. Is there anybody here who still curious about what those mean, or we haven't done a good enough job explaining it, or might get involved? I think that is a no. So that those two both are open calls. The kill examples, I believe someone actually did respond on that, volunteering, but it might have been on the other DAC. So I'll go look for that and see if I can find out who that was who chimed in.
All right, and then we've got one person on the replica sets improvement.
Yeah, and the McCullis has a open work for that right now, so that's really just review constrained at this point, as well as any like further design issues that arrive out of it. And there were a couple of more replica set and deployment improvements that are not listed here on the roadmap. So again, there's more room for contribution, but I think I do think like one of the concrete usability things is at least identified.
Okay. Yeah, I found the person who had signed up. It was Vic. Vic.
He volunteered to move it to charts.
Yes. Yeah, to deal with killing the examples directory. I don't see Vic on. Vic, are you on today? All right, I can take an action to track him down and fire off an email asking if he was still up for it and to put his contact down here.
Can we link the roadmaps that we have for different components like deployments or replica sets? We have roadmaps in GitHub, so it would be nice to link them in this doc.
Yeah. I'll try and get around to that in the next few days. If somebody else has time and would like to do that, please go ahead and do so, or start even. It may take more than one of us to do it.
Yeah, I've added a couple of links here. And then so on relative prioritization, if I guess it would be, again, a call for folks who would like to set priorities of things they would like to see happen in the additional columns. There's a number of them created for people to go scan out, and everybody should have edit permission if you're a SIG member. Just on the general discussion, I assume Mirantis is a 1 on the app controller stuff. So I'm just going to put that on there because I know that they had a number of resources focused on that. I think from a Red Hat side, the only thing that we don't have a resource set on that we consider the #1 priority was the prototype local provision storage. And this is really just something Prashant and I had followed up with Tim to have a discussion on whether we could unblock a prototype there. So there was going to be a follow-up discussion this week, but we hadn't set a time or date or anything, so it might not even happen. But I will both publicize that discussion and the results of it when we try to get something squared away. It would at least be unblocking the possibility for local provision storage, even if we don't commit to it as an alpha feature for 1.5. Eric, was there anything you wanted to call out about your prioritizations?
Well, it could be useful to talk about ones where it's like 1 and 3 and 3 and 1, and then just see if anyone from the community has something that help sway one way or the other. So just go down the list and look at the ones where there's a big difference in opinion.
Sure, yeah. So on prototype local storage, I know that you and I had talked about this. You were saying you didn't think it was a blocker for the pet set work, and there was nobody staffed for it, right?
Right, and then I guess I would just ask folks who wishes they didn't have to set up a storage system and could use the local disk of your nodes as an unreliable storage system.
So I'll say we hear this pretty much all the time, which is we deploy on so many different environments that having something out of the box that just works is very difficult. And so typically what we do is provision host paths. But as soon as you run a deployment on a host path, you're broken. And so basically our experience is if you're always deploying to the same cloud provider, this is not an issue. If you deploy to a mix of environments, or if you're building things that need to work across all environments, this is a really irritating problem because there's no guarantee you're going to even have storage. The bar for setting up like NFS on Metal is not terribly high, but it requires experience. You need to have automated scripts to go set it up and provision it. The Ceph and Gluster work is getting better, but it's still not really magic. And then the flip side of it is people writing templates in OpenShift and Helm charts as well. I've noticed this in some of the things. If you don't have persistent volumes defined, basically you have to put if-def blocks around whether you include persistent volumes. So kind of the fundamental assumption underlying this is that if instead of always having to depend on whether you have an if block around whether you have persistent storage available, that we really want to encourage chart authors and template authors and application authors to assume persistent volumes are there and get a level of persistent volume that allows you to have a chart or template that works across every Kubernetes cluster instead of always having to conditionalize it.
And the current charts don't do that, and we're really thankful for the dynamic PVC provisioning stuff, so we don't have to depend on that.
Yeah, we hear that complaint a lot that in the dependency, when the dynamic provisioning stuff doesn't work, it's surprising, and it's still alpha, so there's still a lot of like hurdles there. We have people who spin up lots of like small prototype clusters, and when you're spinning up a small prototype cluster, like if you've got an Ansible setup or you've got an installation path that sets up persistent volumes for you, it works pretty well. If you don't have that, then you're kind of in this spot of you've got to dive in like 6 levels of detail just to make a template someone wrote on the internet or a chart work.
I just wonder if it feels like making NFS or Gluster or something, be available as a backup on all clusters that don't have another option is the same order of magnitude work as local provision storage, except the former doesn't carry an API load from here to eternity for the project, whereas the latter does.
The problem with NFS would be that even when you set up NFS correctly, you still need the underlying mechanisms so that you can use NFS safely on multiple prioritized storage. And it kind of applies to Gluster as well, which is you can't rely on persistent volumes in the cloud or you can't rely on persistent volumes off cloud to have locks, which means you can't build persistent volumes unless you take that into account. So that's what the pet set fencing work ties into. Is either way, we still need a way to tie persistent volumes to nodes and have a mechanism for locking. If you failed over a pet set that was using NFS, you would get split brain, and you'd potentially have inconsistent writes.
But that puts it on the same par as some other types of dynamically provisioned storage. So,
but you can't really build real apps with it and trust those apps to work. I think that's the tension. Like you can build toy apps, and then the moment you get into production and you corrupt your database, it's a fairly deceptive bar. And so I think sorting out those concerns, the work necessary to sort out letting you use NFS off cloud effectively is basically the same work. Applies to the same problem set as provisioned local storage. You need to be able to have a way to say that a persistent volume applies to a single node. So I actually think that there's a lot of overlap there. Again, from a priority perspective, I wouldn't advocate for us even having alpha in 1.5, but I do want to see the discussion move forward. So I think from a priority perspective, I can change the caveat to be that this is unblocking the decision is the highest priority for me. And then the implementation is not as critical.
Does that work for you, Eric?
I'm happy for us to have a discussion about it.
Okay, so sometime after we finished prioritization, we will definitely carve out time to continue the discussion on this so we can come to some form of conclusion. All right, so I at this point, I think we can move on to Helm. Now, I noticed on the participants, I don't see any days names up here for Helm or charts, and I didn't know if that was intentional, but I think there's a whole bunch more people working on or who are participants in Helm, both Helm and charts repos. I think that the Deis folks might put that as a 1 if they had a choice.
Yeah, I think we probably assumed.
I'll add a column for you guys. I figured you guys could fill out columns on your own. I didn't want to fill them out for you. I mean, get that moved.
Yeah, I know Kirtan is on there for a couple of things already. Kirtan Mala is part of our team. So anything he's on there, you can put us down for 1. But yeah, core Helm and charts were both very, very actively involved.
Yeah.
And for this one, I see that there's some not complete agreement on priority, but that seems totally healthy. We expect there's probably going to be multiple solutions for config and deployment systems that layer on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah. And actually, I was going to say something that we've had a lot of feedback and pressure on recently is an increasing number of people are using Ansible to drive Kubernetes, and they're using it to deploy applications on Kubernetes. And there's kind of a gap right now in that we don't have best practices for how you can use Ansible as a deployment technology on top of Kube. So this is something that I don't have as the priority list. It has come up a huge amount of times for people deploying like productionized databases on top of Kube. So like a couple of examples are actual productionized Elasticsearch at a level of productization where you can hand it off to a complete other team and it just works, versus you hand it off to a team who's expected to administer it themselves and they don't need as much scripting or maintenance. That sort of effort overlaps with a lot of people who are already using Ansible to manage Elasticsearch today. And so we've had a couple of things come up in the last week couple of weeks where people were asking, what are the patterns that you use to apply iterative config, manage upgrades of Elasticsearch at a very detailed level in a kind of I'm providing this as a service for someone else to consume in a production environment. And so I don't have that on the list, but
do you have even one example that you like, Clayton? Because I went poking around at the links that you sent me, and I didn't see any examples that would help me understand how people were using it.
Yeah, so for context, when we ship OpenShift to end customers, we provide an Elasticsearch out of the box that's set up as a scaled, fully replicated, can be upgraded, has all security applied, listens over SSL, shares certificate management with the cluster. And most of those tasks can leverage things in Cube, but can't depend on them because the equivalents in Cube just aren't mature enough to solve all those problems to the level that's necessary. And so there's a large set of Ansible scripts. And I'll start a discussion there. We can maybe talk about this in a SIG-Apps either next week or the week after. I'll get on the agenda for some of the details there and present some stuff for the community to see.
And I know people use Puppet, for example, can ensure the existence of Kubernetes objects. I wonder if this is a situation where people that have a large installed base and experience with the tool are going to want to use that tool with Kubernetes. And so that guarantees that there's going to be a lot of different types of tools in use.
Yeah, a really good rule of thumb that we've started to been able to articulate clearly is if you have an existing technology that you're using to manage config, you will bring that tool and use it to manage config regardless of whether someone's alternative solves some subset of your problems. And in the config management space, for operations teams that need to be able to see something working and see that successfully working, regardless of what, they may not be interested in learning a new technology and they want to apply their existing technology. Having a set of documents and patterns that help them come to the platform more easily is pretty valuable. But yeah, I'll do a follow-up on that.
In fact, I would say, that's probably a top priority is there are a lot of tools folks use, we all admit it, but the patterns and even pointers to where folks have done open source, here's Ansible config to do this. I think that would be really valuable because, somebody who wants to deploy an application comes to Kubernetes and they say, how do I do it well? What can I learn? What are the concepts? And a lot of what we have is much more lower level in operating Kubernetes, but that kind of, I'm an app operator, here's what I need to know, that would probably be pretty valuable. And a lot of that's documentation and pointers to work people are doing to codify that.
Yeah. There's a fair number of questions that fall into that realm.
Yeah.
For sure.
And there's not time for people who have Kubernetes expertise to reach out to who understand apply deeply or whatever, to reach out to every configuration tool and say, here's what you need to do. So we have to think about how we want to encode our best practices so other people can consume them.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of knowledge is being handed around as tribal knowledge right now. And if we can get it down in documentation, that would be, it would make Kubernetes much more consumable for people who need to deploy apps into it.
Yeah, and as concrete feedback, we've had several operations teams say that they really liked Kube Control as a programmable tool for higher level scripting. They appreciate many of the things around outputting JSON and YAML, the way that apply and replace works. But at the same time, they have needs that they need to accomplish that we don't offer clear tooling for, and so they build tooling around us. And then what the support statement is as a Kube community for some of the statements we've made about Kube Control and the fact that we consider it an API and treat it as a backwards compatible API is very valuable to them because it gives them stability as they upgrade. And it encourages that sort of integration level tooling above the platform.
So we've kind of derailed from the priorities. Maybe one of the things we can do is we can set this as a discussion item for one of the coming weeks, and we can say, how should we attack this problem space, and kind of come up with a plan for it.
Yep, agreed.
So I'll put that down to get it on the agenda.
Okay. And there was one other big mismatch, I thought. Actually, there's just a bunch of smaller mismatches, it looks like. And I know Mirantis had folks signed up for the daemon set upgrades, and then there's strong overlap between, as we said last time, there's strong overlap between daemon set upgrades and pet set upgrades. So I think part of the discussion would be to try and ensure that we get review bandwidth for daemon set upgrades, and we have a good number of people listed here. For the review side, to see if we can bring that home, and then the pet set design document upgrade would be able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, there is an open PR that nobody's had time to look at.
Yeah, they sent it to me last week, and I spent a fair amount of time looking through it and trying to get familiar with it. But I think it definitely deserves a what is our philosophy for upgrade, and that's really review bandwidth between you, Brian, and a couple of other people.
But it's also not fair to expect one or two people, to expect everyone in the community to read along PR and infer behavior from code. And we really want more than two people commenting on the workflow. So let's try to get succinct documentation of proposals that we can circulate at the same time as we have, or before we have code for review.
Yeah, I think there should have been a proposal for the deployment for daemon set updates. I think that's important enough to deserve it.
Yeah, I think part of it is that they tried to start based on a previous PR, which was actually not a PR in the direction that I think we want to go. So I just haven't had the energy to go look at that with all the other stuff going on. But we found with deployment that updates are tricky enough, especially doing it in a controller that is low enough latency to expose a lot of distributed systems issues. That is fairly tricky to get right. So I'd actually suggest on the PR, if we want something more expedient, we could start with a client side, like extend kube control rolling update to do daemon sets. But almost certainly, without even looking at the PR, I can say that it's wrong. So, just based on my previous experience.
Okay, I do wonder if, as a follow-up in a future meeting, since we are definitely going to run low time, we actually want to prioritize. Once we get this list of things we put on our top priority, we want to make sure that we have, as Eric, as you said, the proposals list and the prioritization of the proposal discussion in place, so that we know what we need to commit to for 1.5.
Yeah, we might want to reach out to the SIG cluster lifecycle as well, because some of these things like kube control apply and daemon set updates, they're also going to need. So maybe we can find some resources in that SIG to help out with some of these things.
And we do have a couple of crossovers, Luke's stuff for purge and apply. I do think maybe that's a really good point, is to get that prioritization in this week's meeting from them. I'll take a follow-up for that.
One other area of disagreement was on templates in Kubernetes and config map management. I see Mirantis has ones in those columns. Is there someone from Mirantis on this call that could speak to their needs? Okay.
I couldn't find that. I couldn't find unmute button. Yeah, I'm here, but one of the engineers working on the config maps is not here. So what details do you actually need?
Don't need to put you on the spot. Just maybe take 5 minutes next SIG-Apps and just share why those features are important to you.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that will be great. Yeah, we already contributed to the discussions on the GitHub in PRs, but it would be probably great to kind of gather all of this stuff and discuss it. Yeah, that will be great to discuss next week. Yeah.
All right.
Go.
So we're coming into like the last 9 minutes. Is there anything else on the prioritization that we wanted to touch on here? Yes, my one comment when I look at the prioritization is in this type of community where, you know, where we have the names is where the work's really going to get done and where we're putting our priority. So I have a feeling that the areas that have high numbers of names are the things most likely to get a lot done. So if we really want something to get done and we don't see names in that category, let's track folks down and find out who's going to do it. Otherwise, we're probably best off assuming that not a lot of work is going to get done on those in this area, even if we do consider them to be a higher priority and agree to it. And so when I look at some of the stuff, like we'll get the names in there for Helm, I'm sure. I'll chat with Matt and Michelle, and it's probably with her heading out of town for several days that we didn't get more of the days names in there, but I know those will get done. And then the other areas with lots of names, like name and set upgrades, or you know, some of the stuff like with pet sets. Some of that stuff will get more just because we're getting names there. So keep that in mind. If something's a high priority, let's go find bodies to do it if it doesn't have enough names.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of signing up for some of this stuff. I think, you know, if you're in the community and you're looking to contribute, or if you haven't gotten involved with till now, there are a fair amount of people who are willing to help. And I would actually say, even with all the bodies here, it's likely that a lot of this stuff is somewhat optimistic at this point, given how short releases are. Yeah. And so, you know, one of the things is that we're starting up 1.5 now. We have roughly 7 weeks, but only 5 weeks until Code Slush. And so, you know, in terms of amount of time and effort, if you're not working on some of this stuff right now, it's probably going to be tough to bring some of these bigger items to conclusion. And so we're trying to, it would be good if you are already working on these things, or you're interested in these, be thinking about starting work on them now. I know like McCullis and a couple of others have been working pretty heavily on the deployment stuff, you know, for most of the last couple of releases. Things that are kind of in either proposal form now or have already gotten through the proposal phase are most likely things to get into 1.5.
Yeah, and if you're looking for how do you get involved with coding, you know, to help develop one of these and you're not sure, you can reach out to somebody's name on the list, or feel free to reach directly out to me or Michelle, and we will link you up to the right people who will help you get going. We're very happy to point you in the right direction, introduce you to people, whatnot. Or if you're not sure, just go ahead and feel free to reach out and ask. We're always very happy to help try to get you to the right place, or give you our honest thoughts on it and help you. All right, does anybody have anything else in the last few minutes? Silence, I'm going to suggest, means nothing. If you have anything else, feel free to reach out to me. If you have a demo or something you would like to get on the schedule, reach on out. Everyone, have a wonderful week, and I'll give you 6 minutes back. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.